Hi everyone, I'm very excited to share with you the newest version of T3D, version 1.6. In 1.6 I fixed some bugs, but I also added some new operators to the T3D family. There's, for example, a new T3D fit that might not be all that exciting, but very useful in some cases. And there is a new SOP to T3D that I will talk about later in this video. And most exciting for me, the volume T3D, which you see in use right here in this scene. So I have some small network here that basically starts with the T3D torus, and then there's a small feedback loop that after all just traces the movement of the torus over time for a bit. Okay, nothing really exciting happening here. You can see how that T3D looks like in its slices. But this can now be connected into a volume T3D, and that uses a render top and the respective camera and all lights connected to this render top to produce this beautiful, soft, volumetric image based on the input texture. Okay, and the volume T3D comes with this set of parameters at the moment. There is a render top, and this render top is needed. Okay, if I don't use it, it will throw me an error, and also it won't render anything on the render top. I need to connect this. There are some like two parameters for the exact looks of this, so I can change the absorption and the scattering here with some factors. And then we have a distinct render path option, which I will talk about in a second. And we have an optimization parameter tab, and with that we can control kind of the efficiency of this process while also maybe losing some quality depending on the exact use case. Okay, so in this case, for example, I would reset this maybe to its default state, but you will see that I now drop to 51 frames per second, which is okay, but not perfect. And this is also due to the fact that I have a quite high resolution texture that also has a 32-bit float RGBA pixel format. And this is, by the way, quite relevant. You should always look at your pixel format because that definitely impacts efficiency. Okay, and in this case where I lose some frames, I might, for instance, either reduce the light map resolution scale, which brings me back to 60 FPS, while losing some details on the shadows. I might try to compensate for those loss in details by, or even some artifacts that you see occurring here, by increasing or by blurring the light map a bit, but you also see that the scene might get a little bit darker through that. So this is one trade-off you can make, and the other trade-off would be to increase the step size of the light map. Okay, this is stuff that is happening behind the scenes for you, but you will get slightly less detailed shadows for gaining efficiency. Okay, so these are some options you have here. Yeah, but other than that, you can use it as you would expect. So I can look around it with this camera. I can change my light position. I can also change my light type. So now the light is currently not looking at my geometry, so I should maybe put down a look at here, and then I can change the cone angle, make it super tight, and then there's only a slight, only part of the thing is now lit up due to the small cone angle, and then I can increase it again. I can, of course, change the light color, or I can also add a second light. Maybe now it's lit up from above, but I might also want to have a light at the very center of it that is now kind of inside of the torus or in the middle of it, and I could make this one maybe in a bluish tint. Okay, can do all that. And I might also want to, for instance, reduce the density of this scene. This is very low now, but something in between, maybe this, and it would get a different aesthetic and could play, maybe I like this look, it's super soft, could change the absorption factor or the scattering again. But yeah, you see it kind of works with lights and the camera as you might expect. Something you should know is that the compositing with other geometry can be a little bit tricky. Okay, I just realized this torus might be a little bit big for comparison, but here's another like regular, this is really just regular geometry in Touch Designer, and you can see here that they don't really intersect the way you would expect it. And that is basically due to the custom render pipeline I need to have running behind the scenes to get this volumetric scene. But if you want to do this, you have the option here to use the distinct render paths. This will now not render anything on the render top you're referencing, like nothing from that volumetric thing, but you can now use the output here and look at the result from that output, and you should now see, oh yeah, interesting. So, I displayed the wrong scene here. Okay, so now we should see they are now, they're now put together in a more reasonable way. Okay, if I maybe make this more solid, that's more obvious. And the blending basically between them is more reasonable if you use this workflow. So again, if you have other geometry rendered with your volume, you might want to use a distinct render path here. But if you do that, you also need to, you then need to use whatever comes out of the volume T3D and not what comes out of your render top, okay? Maybe so good so far on the details here. I recommend just trying it out yourself. I will get rid of my geometry and maybe put the light color back to white because I want to show you something else that I personally find very interesting, and that is non-uniform density. With that I mean that currently the density here is white. As you can see, that means that red, green, blue always will have the same value at each pixel. But if I would go ahead and change the color of my initial torus here, maybe to a yellowish tint, then the whole scene here is just yellow or white, depending on this feedback loop basically. But this also affects the way the light is scattered independently for red. So the light is basically calculated independently for red, green, and blue. And because of that, we do get this beautiful gradient where the yellow is kind of scattered or absorbed very early on and leaves us with this blue that we see further in there. And if I would change this to maybe a reddish color, we do get this gradient. And I think this is really a source for beautiful gradients and whatnot. Okay, I could also maybe mix this with, I will drop down a constant here. This will first of all leave me with the box because now the whole scene is filled with white, so the density is 1 everywhere. But I actually want to, well, let me first reduce the density of this by quite a lot. So now we can actually see the torus inside of the whole scene. And I might want to set this as a maximum composition. And now you can see the soft shadow, the volumetric shadow, the torus casts. And I could also change the color of this box here to maybe, I don't know, let's use a slight green. And you see how you can mix colors just by mixing different density values here. Nice. And then maybe one last thing to mention about the volume T3D is its size, because so on the transform page of the geometry, you can still like scale it, you can rotate and translate it as you would expect, and it will behave accordingly. And you can also scale it independently in different axes, which might look funny. But you should also be aware that you can, of course, use T3Ds with resolution that is non-uniform in its dimensions. Okay, so for example, now I have decreased the Y resolution. So if this is X, Y, and Z, then I now decreased the Y resolution. It will still work fine. Obviously, the torus is now cut here. And the volume T3D will render this as, or like inside of a box that has the same aspect ratio as your input. Okay, this is maybe something that might have confused people so far. That's why I'm mentioning it in this small video here. And the same is also true for surface T3D, by the way, just so you know. Okay, but yeah, I will be super excited to see all your explorations on this. And I'm sure you will make some beautiful things. Let's get back to full resolution here, but yeah, I do like this small scene already. Okay, this is everything about volume T3D so far. I think the other also exciting news is the SOP2 T3D. Okay, I will go ahead and use this output as an input to my volume. And now we get this scene. This is something we could definitely create using T3D only, but I'm very excited to show you this workflow where I'm starting with SOP geometry, and then using the SOP2 T3D, I can convert this into a 3D texture. And you see that this is happening in just 1.2 milliseconds on my machine here, even though the resolution is quite high with 256 by 128 by 128. And yeah, it's quite easy to use, I would say. You just connect any SOP geometry to it, and you set its max axis resolution. So this might be confusing or like not too intuitive at the moment at first, but you also give it bounds. This is kind of the spatial, the region in space that it will render into a 3D texture. And in this particular case, the shape of this region in space, or the size of it, would be 4 by 2 by 2. So the maximum axis is X with 4. So the maximum axis resolution will be 256, as you can see here, while the other two axes have only half its size. So because of that, the resolution would be 128 in the other two. If, for example, I would reduce Z even further, this would cut the geometry a bit because it is not completely inside of this region I defined here, inside of the bounds. And it would also, well, let me drop down a null in here because I can, to show you the resolution of it. This now is 256 by 128 by 64. Okay, so you kind of set the resolution of this texture 3D through the maximum axis resolution, and the other resolutions will be calculated for you based on the bounds you set here. You can then use the new fit T3D to, for example, in this case, I converted it into a texture that is of size 256 in all 3 dimensions, and just use the fit best option to fit it, to sit it, have it, not with a correct aspect ratio. Sorry, I could also fill it, but that would naturally kind of distort the whole scene because I need to scale it in 2 of the directions of the dimensions. Okay, so I will go back to fit best and talk a little bit more about SOP2. I talked a little bit about the bounds here, and I would like to mention to you that if you have any scene, for example, a torus now, I might not know the bounds perfectly, or you can actually look, you can middle mouse click on this to get the information, you will see the bounds of this object, but it might be annoying to always go here and type them in here, so I set this little parameter pulse here that allows you to, if you click that, it will just fill out these parameters with a respective size. So now in this case, I converted a torus to a T3D scene. And then there's another exciting parameter here that is very useful, which is called fill. And it was toggled on until just now. And if I toggle it off, you will see that only the shell of my SOP, I don't know if you're able to tell this by this depiction of it, but only the shell has density now, and the whole geometry is kind of hollow. That's why it looks the way it looks. But if I click on fill, it will actually fill out the whole scene, the interior of it as well. You might notice that the filling is more expensive because this is based on ray marching behind the scene to some extent, or in a certain way. So if you hit any issues, this could become expensive eventually. Like if I go to 512 here, I assume that this is now definitely eating some of my GPU time. So you will definitely want to consider if you want it to be filled, but you can fill it here. The last 2 parameters here, lock and reload, created for me because you will see that this cooks all the time now, even though my input hasn't changed, and I didn't find any way to prevent that from happening like automatically, and because of that you can just lock it, and that will keep the current state and you can save the GPU time. So even though I've maybe set this to 512, this will be expensive once, but afterwards it won't take any of my GPU time anymore. Okay, so you can lock the current state. If I unlock this, you will see that my frames drop down because it is recalculating this every frame. Okay, and then once you have it locked, you can reload it. If, for instance, I would rotate my torus, or let's say, I will put a transform in between here. If I now rotate my torus, you will see that it has no effect on the texture 3D. And that is because it is locked. If I reload it, it will actually have an effect. And you will also see that, oops, this is not displayed as expected. That is because the bounds are not set correctly anymore. If I would also update the current bounds and then reload, I will see the whole thing. If I would now, for example, unlock this and make this rotation dynamic, then I should probably set the bounds high enough to fit all 3 dimensions, and no matter the rotation, and then I will see the torus in its correct shape all the time. Okay, and then last thing to say about the SOP to T3D is probably the geometry, or the geo parameter here, because you can not only connect any SOP in here, but you can actually use a geometry and use this as a geo input here. Okay, I should then tell my renderer up here that only the volume is supposed to be rendered in there. And now it will generally do both. So if I have both a SOP input connected to my SOP to T3D and a geometry parameter given, it will just render both into a 3D texture. So I will stop this one from happening for the moment. And maybe I will, just as a small example, transform this torus a bit to make it small. And now I can easily, maybe this is something you might be excited about. I will set this to be instanced based on this texture. And you see that it is actually taking these instance information to the 3D texture. So you can now create all kinds of interesting 3D textures based on SOP geometry and instancing and whatnot. The SOP 2 doesn't account for materials or colors at all. We currently only render density, okay, and monochrome density. Yeah, I think this is it for now. This is the newest version of T3D. I hope you are as excited as I am, and yeah, I'm looking forward to see your creations. Thanks a lot for listening, and see you all soon. Bye.